So I've managed to get around to playing through Lies of P, a recent action Soulslike game from the Korean-based developers over at NEOWIZ and Round8 Studio. Although the game is inspired by the original novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio, Lies of P takes the approach of a darker retelling loosely based on that story. The game takes place in a city where puppets were invented due to the discovery of an innovative power source which has been used to fuel them. For a time, puppets stood alongside humans, performing labor and other positions within society as they were bound by what is known as the Grand Covenant, a set of laws which forbid puppets from attacking humans and lying to them. Despite these laws, one day, the puppets turned and began murdering most of the human population. In Lies of P, you play as a robotic puppet in search of locating his creator, Geppetto. Entangled in a maze of lies with untrustworthy figures, your character is on a journey in the pursuit to become a human being, as unlike other puppets, he does possess the ability to lie. Throughout this journey, you'll discover the true nature of your identity, the power source which drives the puppets, and the story behind what led to the city's downfall. Being a Souls-like game, Lies of P shares certain aspects in common with the genre when it comes to storytelling. For one, various collectibles are found throughout the environments, such as notes and letters, which contain information about other stories and experiences that have taken place, in addition to reoccurring conversations with NPCs that, coupled with the collectibles, help to further flesh out the broader lore of the world. Unlike some other Souls-like games, however, Lies of P does maintain a main narrative that is directly told to the player through dialogue and cutscenes, leaving no question as to what is happening or who or what a character's background is. I like that the developers decided to take this approach with the game's story. As for a narrative-driven game, I personally prefer a story that is more easily followable, compared to one that is intended to be discoverable. As your character has the ability to lie, the developers also implemented a lie system mechanic in the game, wherein situations are presented to you in which you have the choice to lie or tell the truth. Your choices here do carry some consequences throughout the game. For example, affecting branching paths of certain NPC quests, as well as which of the multiple endings you receive. Your actions also affect whether you gain humanity points, an additional mechanic in the game in which you gain these points for making decisions that are more aligned to what a human would make rather than a puppet. I thought this was a cool feature, as it puts the player in control of who you ultimately become. Would you rather remain a puppet, telling the truth and following orders without question, or would you prefer to gradually improve your imitation of humans and become a real boy? The choice is yours. The graphics in Lies of P are excellent, with very polished visuals at every turn. Fortunately, the game offers an option to disable the HUD to let these visuals shine without obstruction. The art style of the game reminds me of a mix between the 2006 film The Prestige and late 19th century French art, like what you would see from exhibitions during that time at the World's Fair in Paris, for example. The environments tell a story of the culture of a decadent city that once was a destination of beauty and vibrance, that has now turned into a living nightmare, with puppets and other infected creatures now roaming every street and corner. Throughout the game, you'll cover several environments, including city streets and residential areas, train stations and industrial factories, caves and swamps, galleries and opera houses, and of course, the requisite Soul's imposing grandiose tower. With a few exceptions, the overall tone is a dark one. However, there is sufficient variety in the game's environments, which set them apart and give each area their distinct feel. Lies of P is designed as a linear game, but linear in a good way. You never really have to worry about getting lost or figuring out where to go next, which I found to be a plus as it allows the game to maintain a consistent forward momentum. Paths often branch off temporarily and loop back via convenient shortcuts that are unlocked, further easing the navigation of the area and allowing you to recover your health at a nearby rest point before proceeding further into the level. Levels are also paced quite well, with each section being able to be completed within 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your playstyle. So you can still make meaningful progress if you're short on time and not end up bored spending forever slogging through a level, wondering when it's going to end. Shortly after the game's beginning, you'll be prompted to select one of 3 preset combat styles. Each style is tied to a different starting weapon and stats for your character, which cater to a particular playstyle. As you progress through the game, however, you will earn points to level up, and eventually gain the option to respec your character, so there's no reason here to feel pressure that you'll be stuck with your choice. The power source which fuels puppets is no different than that which animates your character, and this source serves as both the game's currency to purchase items with, and what you spend to level up your stats. While the option to farm this from enemies at a greater volume exists, in my experience I found the game generous enough and the default quantity dropped that I never felt the need to farm for the purpose of overcoming a difficult section of the game. When it comes to weapons, the game features several of them and they feel really awesome to use. Whether you're into quick hitting in and out weapons that offer some degree of range in their attacks, or slow moving powerhouses, there's something for everyone here. Each weapon is bound with a special ability known as a Fable Art, consisting of both an offensive and defensive special move. These are the equivalent of Elden Ring's Ashes of War, providing you with expanded options to your combat strategy. On top of this, new weapons themselves can be crafted by means of switching which existing weapon blade is attached to which handle, providing you with even greater freedom to combine the preferred attack style of one weapon with the Fable Art of another. You also wield a secondary weapon known as the Legion Arm, a swappable weapon which brings additional unique abilities to combat. Each arm may be upgraded to further expand their capabilities. Used wisely, these arms can make a huge difference when fighting stronger enemies and bosses, so it's in your best interest to experiment to find out what works for you. Personally, I mainly stuck with the puppet string arm, as there are few options in the game to attack enemies at long range, so using this arm allowed me to both close in more quickly on enemies, as well as pulling select enemies from a group without triggering aggro on the broader group. As for other equipment, you have your usual consumable and throwable items, such as those that buff your character or inflict status ailments on enemies, as well as amulet accessories, which augment your stats and grant you additional abilities. Once your equipment is set, you can head out to the training area located at your base of operations on the hotel grounds. Here you can test out your weapons on combat dummies before taking them out into real combat. While a somewhat minor feature, I enjoyed this addition to the game, as this area allowed me to gauge my weapon damage and possible attack range, experiment with Fable Arts, and more. Lastly, there are a few other areas related to combat that I found particularly interesting, starting with the skill tree known as the P Organ. This upgrade system contains various nodes which grant bonus abilities once their empty slots have been filled, using a special currency found in the game. When filling an empty slot, you additionally get to select various effects to apply to yourself, ranging from attack, survival, ability, and item categories. As you unlock more nodes, additional phases open up on the skill tree, containing further abilities to choose from. I found this system very engaging as I would rush back to the hotel after acquiring new currency to see what I could unlock next. I'd also like to point out that unlike some other games, the abilities found on the skill tree here really do make a meaningful impact in combat and on your character build. For example, abilities which grant you additional healing, or ones that increase the window of time an enemy remains in a staggerable state. Another interesting area is how the game handles health recovery. Parrying an enemy attack with a perfect guard results in no HP loss. However, holding your guard through an attack results in reduced HP loss compared to taking it full on. This is where guard regain kicks in, which is the ability for you to regain partial HP by successfully hitting an enemy. The portion of HP which you can recover steadily drains down the longer you wait, so this system encourages players to play a little more aggressively to reap the benefits. On top of this, once you've exhausted all of your pulse cells, you enter a discharge state in which up to one pulse cell can be recovered an infinite number of times by continuously attacking enemies. And if you do happen to die, rather than losing all of your accumulated currency, you only end up losing portions of it for every attack you take on your return trip to retrieve it, with the option to recover portions of this loss as well by attacking enemies back, similar to guard regain for your HP. I found these three systems great additions to Lies of P, as unlike some other Souls-like games, you're not left completely stranded should you make a mistake or find yourself empty-handed. Even in my playthrough of the game, for example, the ability to recover a pulse cell led to some truly incredible comebacks after I was certain I would face death and have to start over again. When it comes to enemies, you will encounter three different types consisting of puppets, carcass, and humans. Encountered everywhere are your regular enemies, which typically pose little threat unless they gang up on you in larger quantities. Next up are your elite enemies, much stronger variants of regular enemies, although at times they may be unique themselves. Given their atypical character design, most of the time you'll know in advance that an enemy is elite before you approach. However, I have found cases where they appear unassuming or resemble a regular enemy, and well, let's just say once either one of you attacks first, you'll find out soon enough. If in doubt, just assume the worst and prepare accordingly. Next to your elites are the mini-bosses. These enemies present a challenge somewhere in between that of elites and the full-fledged bosses of the game. You could say that mini-bosses serve as somewhat of a skill check, challenging you to improve your dodging, perfect guarding, endurance, and patience. I'm sure there are many players out there who found some of these mini-bosses to send them back to the drawing board more than the actual bosses of the game, myself included. Lastly, you have the main bosses. Featuring unique and harder hitting attack combinations and larger health pools, the main bosses of Lies of P are fought at the end of a level and are required to be defeated in order to progress. If you're facing difficulty progressing, or would just rather breeze through more quickly, you do have the option of summoning an AI-controlled ally to support you in battle, who may help draw attention away from you and allow you to deal added damage. In addition to your character, this ally can also receive buffs in battle through the use of a special item, providing you with more flexibility to determine your best approach. Depending on your prior experience or lack thereof with Souls-like games, your mileage may vary in terms of how hard you find these bosses. Speaking personally, I thought the majority of them were fair enough and not that bad, able to be overcome after mastering avoidance of the one or two tricks up their sleeves thrown at you. With that said, there are definitely some that teeter on the harder side, with a few of these crossing over into frustration territory. If you've already played Lies of P and are watching this video, you know exactly who I'm referring to. Whether it's insane repeated rushdown attacks with tight windows to dodge or take HP and stamina recovery, attack combos that, if landed, can flip the entire course of battle and place you near death, attacks where each hit feels like a collision with a semi-truck, or a mixture of the above with the added bonus of status elements inflicted upon you. The more difficult bosses of Lies of P will test not only your skills, but also your sheer patience. Upon defeat, you're awarded with a rare currency which you may exchange with a key merchant for either their boss weapon or a special amulet, so be sure to browse the selection and pick what you prefer. While my view of Lies of P overall is quite positive, there are a few observations and issues I noticed throughout my playthrough, starting with enemy aggro and tracking. The enemy tracking in this game is borderline ridiculous. The uncommunicated agreement in these types of games is that most enemies are not required to be killed for you to make progress. Therefore, if you need to skip some guys and speed through, while they will attempt to attack you, if you make it far enough, then they'll let you go. While this is also true to an extent in Lies of P, the difference here is that enemies will seem to follow you forever across ridiculously long distances. On numerous occasions, I observe situations where I get attacked by one or two enemies who followed me all the way seemingly from an entirely different section of the level, including situations where I would trigger enemy aggro and be followed despite being on a far higher elevation. Although not a huge deal, another issue I observed is that many of the main bosses are far larger in size than your character, and this presents an issue with the camera when they move in close to you, as you lose nearly all visibility, especially if you're pinned against a wall or an object. Since the camera doesn't zoom or pan out, you can't even see what attack is coming to dodge or guard against, much less dodge out of a corner, as the large character model of the boss blocks most of your movement. As for issues I found more impactful, I'll start with the lack of poise being implemented in the game. Poise generally works by providing varying degrees of stun resistance based on your equipment. In Lies of P, however, this doesn't exist, and therefore nearly any action you perform can be interrupted by an enemy attack. Most enemies and bosses have a recovery animation after attacking that allows you to freely hit them. However, the lack of poise seems to encourage and prioritize faster weapons, as you can more quickly get in and out, and as a result, lower the chance of being interrupted. Lastly, the most egregious omission from Lies of P, in my opinion, is the lack of a visible stagger gauge for stronger enemies and bosses, as the game encourages you to take advantage of the additional damage caused to enemies by staggering them quickly, even going as far as having one boss fight entirely centered around this strategy. I don't understand why the developers would decide to not communicate this to the player. Having a visible stagger gauge informs the player of how much and how fast they are progressing in terms of staggering the enemy, providing them key feedback which may affect their combat strategy. Perhaps, rather than creating distance to heal and getting killed due to a miscalculation, you see that 2 additional attacks or perfect guards would stagger the boss. So instead, you decide to pursue that route, which leads to a fatal attack that defeats the boss. This is a type of combat data that is crucial for the player to know. After all, the game is calculating the precise moment at which the boss will be staggered, so why shouldn't I know that too? After the credits roll, you can either immediately begin a New Game Plus run, or delay that and instead return back to the hotel to wrap up any unfinished business, which I would recommend as there are certain items you can only acquire at this point. New Game Plus lets you carry over nearly all acquired items and upgrade progression from your original playthrough. Furthermore, additional nodes on the skill tree open up to New Game Plus 2. The base difficulty is raised, however enemies do also drop more currency, and higher stat versions of defense parts and certain amulets can be acquired. Aside from this, the story and events remain identical, so you may choose to experiment with different choices in the Lie system to achieve different quest outcomes or game endings. All things considered, I think Lies of P is an awesome game and a worthy entry to the Soulslike genre. While there were some frustrating aspects and questionable omissions, overall, I had a blast 100%ing the game and would highly recommend it to both returning Souls fans and newcomers alike. The developers over at NEOWIZ have already confirmed plans for DLC, revealing 2 sketches teasing a portion of its content. Furthermore, content found in the game's end credits seem to suggest a potential future direction for the game, and I for one am looking forward to what they deliver next. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what your thoughts were on Lies of P. Till next time.